Why is Trump still interested in the idea of making Canada the 51st state? Canadians consider Trump's rhetoric about the 51st state a threat to national security and question the origin of his annexation idea. A White House official stated that the idea of the 51st state spontaneously came to Trump's mind. He emphasized that the proposal is taken seriously and is driven by the belief that annexation would bring benefits to both Americans and Canadians. As President Trump mentioned, Canadians would benefit from lower taxes and secure borders by becoming citizens of the esteemed 51st state of the United States, said White House spokeswoman Anna Kelly. Canadians consider Trump's vision of making Canada part of the United States as insulting, repulsive, and increasingly a serious threat to their national security. While they recognize that an invasion from the U.S. is not imminent, they believe Trump's persistence in imposing tariffs on Canadian imports is a real attempt to weaken the country's economy, making the idea of annexation a more concrete possibility. David McLaughlin, a Canadian politics expert and former Chief of Staff to Prime Minister Brian Mulroney, stated, "It's one thing to say this before taking office. It's another thing to make that statement with the United States seal on the podium. We're asking ourselves, why does he keep talking about this? It must be because he really wants it to happen." In interviews, current and former allies of Trump, Canadians with political connections, and foreign relations experts raised other theories. Among them is the idea that right-wing influencers, Trump's political advisors, or even a casual meeting at Mar-a-Lago earlier this year might have influenced the president to start his crusade for the idea of the 51st state. Former Trump administration officials do not recall the concept of the 51st state being mentioned during Trump's first term. Former Secretary of Commerce Wilbur Ross and former National Security Advisor John Bolton told the Washington Post that they had never heard Trump talk about the issue before. However, Gerald Butts, former Principal Secretary to Trudeau, stated in a recent social media post that the idea of the 51st state came up frequently during previous interactions between the president and Trudeau. Trump began referring to Canada publicly as the 51st state before his second inauguration and has steadily increased his rhetoric in the first 2 months of his presidency. He argued that union with the United States would result in tax cuts for Canadians, as well as improved border security and military defenses for Canada. Initially, President Trump's statements about Canada becoming the 51st state were seen by many Canadians as jokes or exaggerated negotiation tactics. However, over time, these remarks began to be taken more seriously, especially after concrete actions, such as the imposition of trade tariffs and the persistence in annexation rhetoric. This shift in perception reflects growing concerns that such statements may have deeper implications for Canada's sovereignty and national security. Pete Hoekstra, appointed by Trump to be the next ambassador to Canada, also seemed uncertain about how to handle his boss's comments. During his Senate confirmation hearing last week, Hoekstra was asked if he agreed that Canada is a sovereign nation and that the idea of being called the 51st state should not even be considered a joke. Hoekstra stated that Canada is indeed a sovereign state. As for the relationship between the president and the former prime minister with Canada, the characteristics and nature of that relationship, well, he doesn't know. Memes and jokes about a possible annexation of Canada spread in right-wing circles on the internet in the year leading up to the 2024 election. Former Fox News host Tucker Carlson and political commentator Tim Pool discussed the potential for an invasion of Canada, or, as Carlson put it, liberating the great nation of Canada from itself. Trump also mentioned the possibility of annexing Canada during a dinner with Trudeau in late November, according to reports at the time. However, a Canadian minister who was present at the meeting insisted shortly after that the then president-elect was just joking. Since then, Trump's interest in annexing Canada has become more evident, the British newspaper The Telegraph pointed to a possible source: Peter Navarro, Trump's trade advisor, who has been advocating for the president's tough policies regarding tariffs on Canada. When asked about Navarro's influence on the annexation idea, a White House official, speaking on the condition of anonymity to explain the president's thinking, stated that it was the president himself who had the idea. Another possible influence could be Kevin O'Leary, also known as Mr. Wonderful, one of the stars of the reality show Shark Tank. O'Leary, who is Canadian, has been advocating in recent months for a formal economic alliance between the US and Canada, similar to the European Union. He proposes an integrated immigration system, mutual citizenship, and a shared currency. O'Leary was one of several people close to Trump who traveled to Mar-a-Lago in early January to meet with the president before the inauguration. During that time, O'Leary recalls having a conversation with Trump about Canada, his family's connections to both countries, and his affinity for both. On January 6th, Trump posted on Truth Social, "Many people in Canada love being the 51st state. If Canada joined the US, there would be no tariffs, taxes would drop drastically, and they would be fully safe from the threat of Russian and Chinese ships constantly surrounding them. Together, what a great nation it would be." Trump's allies claim that all of this is just aggressive rhetoric to strengthen his position in trade negotiations between the US and Canada. Donald Trump's statements about the possibility of annexing Canada as the 51st state reveal a discourse that, although initially treated as a joke or an exaggerated tactic, has become an increasing concern for Canadians. This type of rhetoric not only provokes reactions in the political and economic spheres, but is also generating a nationalist and patriotic sentiment among Canadian citizens, who have started adopting attitudes of explicit rejection to the idea and strengthening their identities as a sovereign nation. Trump's persistence in continuing to raise this topic, with his aggressive trade policies, such as the imposition of tariffs, can be seen as an attempt to pressure Canada into aligning more closely with the United States. At the same time, the response from political figures and Canadian citizens indicates that the impact of such statements goes beyond a simple trade issue, directly affecting the perception of sovereignty and na. The introduction of other influences such as Peter Navarro and Kevin O'Leary suggests that there are more elements behind this rhetoric, involving both trade issues and a strategic view of a possible deeper alliance between the two countries. However, it is important to note that despite all the noise caused by these statements, there is still no concrete movement indicating that this idea is viable or that it has significant support within the governments of the United States or can. In summary, although the possibility of annexation is unlikely, the impact of Trump's words and the way they are being received in Canada reinforce an atmosphere of uncertainty and tension that will undoubtedly affect the bilateral relations between the two countries in the future. The issue is far from just a simple discussion about tariffs, reflecting deeper concerns about identity, sovereignty, and the consequences of a complex relationship between the two nations.